series. His latest work is on Before Watchmen. There might be some Namor stuff in there that we can talk about too, but please give it up for Jae Lee. Tricky.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming out today.
Oh, thank you for having me. I don't know if I have enough material for 15 minutes, but I'll try.
We'll make it work. The theme of this panel series is secret origins, and so sort of the first question everybody has been getting asked is, what is the first piece of comics work that you were paid for, and how did you get to the point where you were offered that?
Well, my first official job was for Marvel Comics Presents, number, I want to say 92, but I can't remember. I think that was back in 1990. I started in 1990, it might have come out in 1991. But before that, my first comic book page that I get paid for, I was uncredited because it's kind of a long story, but I guess I could fill up 50 minutes with this.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So when I was 13 years old, I started going to the local comic book conventions, and I would enter the art contests. And I didn't want to pay for the ticket. So if you won the art contest, you get like free stuff. And the art contest was held outside of the convention in just in a hallway by the main convention. It's one of those really small ones. So I would just bring some artwork, just put it on the table, and not pay for the convention, and just hang out until they judged the art contest. And if I won, I'd get free comics and $20 or something. So I would do that every convention. They had one every month. And then I was winning them, but then I was using the same piece of artwork every month. But every month they would have a different guest artist come in and judge the contest.
So they would never, it was always
right, it was
new.
always a different artist, so he had never seen the piece. But then the convention organizers caught on, and they kicked me out. They said, "Oh, he doesn't even buy tickets." So I was unofficially banned, which is kind of funny because years later, when I became a professional, they asked if I could do some shows, which is kind of ironic.
Judge some contests?
No, be a guest at the show.
Oh, right, okay.
Right. But anyway, one of the artists that was a judge was an inker named Bob Downs. I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area in Northern Virginia, and he was an inker. And I was 13, he was 40. This sounds like a really creepy story, and it probably wouldn't fly today. But he was this really nice guy. He saw that I had potential, so he invited me over to his place. Now, it sounds weird, right?
These were innocent times.
It was.
It's okay.
It was
a more
Your mind doesn't
innocent
even
time.
go there now.
Yeah.
But, nowadays, forget it. If I had a kid, I wouldn't.
Right.
Yeah. Dad, some 40-year-old guy invited me over to his basement. And he literally did live in his mom's basement. But it was because, he was an inker, and, artists live a very solitary life. He doesn't know anybody. And he just loved talking about art. And he kind of mentored me. He'd showed me all this really cool artwork from, like Hal Foster's Valiant, Prince Valiant, and Edgar Rice Burroughs, all the Tarzan strips, like the ones that Byrne Hogarth had done. And he'd show me these collections, but I was a kid, and I just thought, no, I really like John Byrne. These guys don't know how to draw. But he was an inker, but his big claim to fame was doing background inks for Tony DeZuniga and Tom Palmer. And he would show me a John Buscema page that he had, and he'd say, "See that boot? I inked that boot." And I thought, wow, that was amazing. And so anyway, he was an inker, and he was inking, I want to say young All-Stars.
Okay.
And I think Rags Morales was drawing the book. and this was around 1988 or so. And Bob was inking it, and he spilled ink all over the page, and he ruined it. And he was under a tight deadline. And this is before you can scan something and email it back. There's no scans of this stuff. If it's destroyed, it's destroyed. And there's no time to FedEx a page and do all that. And so he called me up and said, Jay, can you come over and just redraw this page? And a lot of it had ink on it, so I just kind of had to make it up. And so I redrew it, and I was really into John Byrne at the time. So, and I was trying to draw like the artist. So you have the artist stuff, and then you have this one page that looks kind of like a really bad John Byrne. And I would imagine if I was the artist, I'd look at the book and go, what the hell is this? But anyway, he paid me for the page like $30 or something. I don't remember what it was. But it printed, and that was my first, I guess, paying gig.
That's wild. It's crazy that you mentioned that you love John Byrne because you wound up working with him, correct?
Yeah, I did.
Can you talk about how you sort of came onto that book? Because he had been doing the art originally, right? It was for Namor.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, before I get to that, I just want to finish my story about Bob.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry.
So he shows me all this stuff. He had a basement just stacked full of old books, like the first printings of the Prince Valiant books, and all this old John B. Summer original art. And years later, I called him up, and then I finally got into Hal Foster's art. I called him up and I said, "Remember all those original books you had? Can I buy those from you?" And he said he gave them away to a friend. And can you imagine how much that would be worth? Not just that, but the original art that he had, the John B. Summer art.
That's crazy.
Anyways, I think I missed it by about 3 months.
Wow.
He had just given it away. He gave it away.
That is kind of an amazing story, though, that your break was like through an accident that you sort of were able to go in and do a full page.
Yeah. Well, that wasn't my... But
that didn't break you through because nobody knew you did that, right?
Right, I did that, and then I never thought I could do it professionally, so I went to art school for about 3 months. And well, yeah, I was in the art department in high school, and they had a speaker come in to talk about prospective schools. And my parents really wanted me to go to college and just get some kind of a degree. They didn't care what kind of degree. So I said, you know what, I'm just going to get it. Or so when the representative came, and he said that he represents the Art Institutes. It's a chain of art schools. They offer an associate's degree, so it's kind of like a trade school.
Yeah.
I thought, oh, so it's only 2 years. That's fine. I'll sign me up for that. It's a degree. And so I went to Atlanta, but the courses were essentially it was like, here's a font, here's the whole alphabet, uppercase, lowercase, draw it freehand. And that was like a week's worth of work, just copying fonts.
Weird.
Yeah, and it almost seemed like they were giving us busy work to just pass the
That
time.
seems like busy. I don't think it seems like that.
Right.
That definitely is more busy work.
Well, especially now, because of course a year later, when this was before computers, and then just a year later, everyone started using computers for everything. So I spent several weeks doing that, and of course it would have been obsolete.
Oh man.
Yeah. Who does that anymore?
I was going to say there are a lot of programs and stuff for doing letters, but the Marvel Presents thing you mentioned, that was the first paid professional work.
Right.
And what story was that? Because Marvel Presents was it was that kind of split anthology series, right?
Yeah,
they gave away Charleston shoes, I think, for a while as part of the Marvel Presents. If you bought enough, you got like a Charleston shoe. Anyway, it was a strange era of comics.
I know, they were giving away anything.
Yeah.
I think one comic actually packaged in like $1 or something, which is weird. But so I was asked to do, after college and stuff, I dropped out, but that's another whole story. But the Marvel Comics Presents thing, the writer was Scott Lobdell, and he wrote an eight-part B story. Each part was about 8 pages long, and Rob Liefeld had started it. And he did the first 2, and then he got New Mutants. So he dropped it and did New Mutants, and then his career took off. But so this short story that he started was sitting in the drawer for a couple of years, and he did the first part, the first 8 pages, and then the second part he left out 2 pages. He did all the exciting scenes, and then there was 2 pages of the Beast as a teenager playing football or something. So I had to draw those. And if you look at the book, you have Rob Liefeld's art, and then you have a page that's like 2 pages are just all black, pretty much. So I drew it. I put a lot of ink in it. Well, I put a lot of black, and the inker inked it, and then the colorist colored it like dark blue and purple. And after that printing job, I said, every colorist I've ever worked with after that, I said, I do not ever want to see purple in the book. It's just because I think it prints horribly. And of course, I worked on Ozymandias, where he's wearing a purple costume.
Well, I was going to say,
right.
Did you, when you did that, were you trying to match Rob Liefeld's art?
No, no.
So they didn't want you to pretend, they didn't want you to sort of do something that looked approximate, like in his style.
Yeah. They could have done that, I guess, but they were pretty nice about it.
That's great.
Yeah, do your thing.
So how did you wind up working with John Byrne on Namor?
Well, the editor that hired me for Marvel Comics Presents, his name was Terry Cavanaugh, and he was also editing Namor. And when Byrne said he wanted to just step back and move on to other stuff and just write, Terry asked me if I wanted to draw the book. And at that time, I was offered some X-Men stuff, and Jim Lee was a hero of mine at that time. So I thought, wow, I get to do some X-Men stuff. So here's Namor, which didn't sell at all, and then you had the X-Men. And I thought about it, and first of all, the X-Men wasn't a done deal. They wanted to try me out on some backup stories. But if I did a good job, there might be more. But here it was Namor that was a regular book. I'd get to do all of it, a sure thing. So I went with that. And I ended up doing some X-Men stuff. It was an annual, so I did get a chance to do that. But yeah, that's how that happened.
What was it like working with John Byrne? Did you work with him closely? You said you had sort of admired him growing up.
Yeah.
How hands-on was he with the book and with you? And
Well, back then everyone worked Marvel style, which was they give you a loose plot. A 22-page book would be maybe 3 or 4 pages of plot, and you draw it up, and then they get the artwork and script it. So the acting is really up to you. The pacing is really up to you. And it's not that we talked on the phone or anything. I just got the plot. I didn't dare ever call him because I was so nervous, and I just drew it and sent it off. But after a couple of issues, Terry called me up and invited me up to New York and said, "How'd you like to meet John Byrne?" And I thought, wow, that'd be awesome. And he'd say, how'd you like to go to his house? And he was living in Connecticut at the time, so I took the train up to New York, and Terry rented a car because nobody has a car up there. And then we drove out to Connecticut, and he actually took us antiquing.
oh my God, that's amazing! Antiquing with John Byrne.
Here I was. I thought, wow, I get to spend an afternoon with John Byrne. I wanted to talk to him about Superman, X-Men.
Right.
I wanted to see all of his artwork. Instead, we go look at garden statues.
You were on Namor for how many issues? It was a fair.
I think it was 12 issues, one
Okay.
year.
And around the time that your run on that was ending, that was the era when Jim Lee, when Rob Liefeld, all those guys were leaving to found Image, correct?
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about what it was like being an artist at that time and seeing your contemporaries suddenly taking these huge leaps of faith?
Well, first of all, they weren't my contemporaries. They were superstars. I was just a kid starting out. So I greatly admired them, and it's not like I look at it and go, oh, these guys get this, because they were way beyond where I was. So I admired all these guys, and I admired the guts that they had. But when they did it, Marvel did say anybody that works for them or does any work or even talks to them at that point would be fired. They never came
Wow.
out and said it, but they did give you a warning. And so I can't remember who called me first. I think it was Rob Liefeld. But I was working on Namor. I was just a few issues into it, and he called me up and asked me if I wanted to do some stuff for Image, for Extreme. And he goes, Rob Liefeld, and I was like, I can't talk to you. I have to go. Because I thought Marvel would find out.
They were tapping your phones.
Yeah, I think I said no several times. But then he called me up and said, what's your page rate? And I was drawing for $80 a page.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and Marvel's page rates were really low back then. And then he just said, yeah, I'll offer you this amount. And it was a crazy amount. It would have been more than I made in a year for doing like a few pages. So
Wow.
I just said, okay. But then I thought, I don't believe you.
How can this be?
Yeah. And then he said, I'll overnight you a check. I'll pay you in advance. And then, yeah. So then I quit Marvel.
And how did, obviously that was probably a pretty terrifying thing to do. Marvel's so established, and I'm
Right.
sure, as you said, you didn't consider those guys to be necessarily your contemporaries because, they were sort of superstar artists. I mean, Rob was in a Levi's commercial.
Yeah.
So it was this huge
Yeah.
thing. Were you scared at all? Like, what if they won't ever let me back? Or did you feel like really confident in that?
Yeah, you kind of have to take a leap of faith, but it's just when you feel like, at Marvel, at that time, it was a very corporate environment. You ask for a raise and they'll give you maybe an extra $5 for the page. And then you have these guys that are really excited about you coming over and doing work for them, and then promising you the world. It's an offer you couldn't refuse.
Right.
So was I worried about what was going to happen 5 years from now? Of course, but even if I did stay at Marvel and work my butt off for them, I'd still be worried.
Right.
Because this isn't a very secure job.
No. To hop back just a little bit, just to talk about the artwork before we go back to Image. I'm curious, when you were working on Namor, was that still in the green Speedo era?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm curious, not about his green Speedo, but I'm just curious, like, what did you sort of find was the most challenging thing about being put on an ongoing book, or specific to that comic itself?
Well, the most challenging job of any regular book is the schedule.
Right.
So just month in, month out, doing the book was a challenge.
Was it? It was more than 22 pages an issue back then,
It was
wasn't
22.
it? Was it 22?
22, yeah.
Okay. I wasn't sure. It's been
Yeah.
scaled back to 20, I think, now at a lot of the big books.
Yeah, I'm not too crazy about that. It's like, and back then 22 pages. It took a while to read because they used so many more words. Now it's a quick read.
Yeah.
And getting back to the old Namor stuff, I have a hard time looking at that. Like if you look at the cover of Namor number 26, that was the first cover I did. And I drew his nipples like up here, which is weird. Go look at that cover. Google it or something.
Everybody go Google Namor 26.
Yeah, and I'm thinking, what?
Is it tough to look back at your stuff?
Yeah, it's really tough.
At which point in the progression of your career can you start looking back and feel like because I think every creator, whether it's a writer or an artist, looks back on their stuff and up to a certain point is like, ooh, I was learning, I'm so embarrassed. At what point did you suddenly feel like I'm no longer having that reaction with my work?
To an extent, I still have that. There are, I'd say the first piece of work that I was really proud of, that I could just step back and say, you know, I gave it my best and not cringe too much, was probably Dark Tower #1.
Wow.
I spent a lot of time on the first issue. Of course, when you spend a lot of time on the first issue, that means you don't have any time for the rest of the
Right.
books. But it was nice to just put everything I had into it and see what happened. But ultimately, I was working with Richard Eisner on the colors, or he did the colors, and he was painting over the artwork. So in the end, it wasn't what I had intended 100%.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until I started working with my wife. Her name is June Chung. She's the colorist I work with, and you know, that's when I could really just, you know, look over her shoulder and say, hey, can we do this? Can we do that? And I feel like the work that we're doing together, I finally feel like this is what I had envisioned when I did this.
That's really cool. I want to get back to the Dark Tower in a second, but briefly, you know, at Image, you had a creator-owned title.
Right.
And what was your sort of progression at Image? Did you, when Rob gave you that call to do an extreme book, were you working on one of his books first and then hopping over and doing your own?
Yeah, when Rob first called me up, he asked me if I wanted to do my own book. But you know, I was maybe 19, or yeah, I think I was 19 at the time. I didn't know anything about writing, doing my own book. You had to market it yourself. I didn't know anything about that. So I just said, I don't think I'm ready for that. Can I just do some stuff for you? And he said, yeah, and he came up with Youngblood Strike File. I did half the book, Rob did the other half. And when Jim Lee heard I was doing something, he called me up and said, I have a book for you if you want to do it. It's Wildcats Trilogy.
Wow.
I said, yeah, absolutely. So I did those, and then I finally felt like, you know what, I'll try something creator-owned. And so I came up with Hellshock back in 1994. And it was a deadline disaster. It took me, well, the first miniseries I did within a reasonable amount of time. But on the first issue, you know, it was supposed to be a 22-page book. I ran out of time, and it ended up being like 14 pages. And then I put in some pin-up art and a backup story that I had abandoned. And nobody checked it, and it printed.
Wow.
It came out, and the Image guys flipped out.
Really?
You know? Yeah, Todd McFarlane flipped out. He goes, what the hell is this guy doing? A 14-page book? And I had to apologize profusely. I got fired, and Jim Lee stepped in and said, hey, look, you know, he screwed up. He's just a kid. Let's give him another shot. And he said, you know, he'll oversee it, and just make sure that I, you know, put out 22 pages this time. So I did Hellshocks 2, 3, and 4.
You were fired from your own creator-owned work.
I was fired from my own creator-owned work, yeah.
There are not many people that can, you can sort of wear it as a badge of honor.
Yeah, yeah. And, yeah, but ultimately, those books came out. I wasn't really happy with them, obviously, because, you know, I was a kid, and they're kind of embarrassingly bad. And so when I did Hellshock Volume 2, I said, I really want to take the time to just do my research, learn how to write, and take my time with it. And to make up for the 14-page first issue, I did like a 38-page first issue for Volume 2 at the same price as a regular book. And so it was a really thick book, and I think I put so many words into it, because the first miniseries you could read in 2 minutes.
Right.
So I think the first volume, second volume of first issue of Volume 2 takes maybe 40 minutes to read. I would clock myself. I read it like 10 times. All right, stop, start. All right, 40 minutes. That's awesome.
Wow. So let me ask you, do you think that that first Hellshock book and that first sort of Hellshock run, was it because you didn't have this self-imposed, you didn't have a deadline of a work for hire project? Because I know for sometimes creator-owned comics, you'll get these huge lapses between issues, almost because there's not that smoking gun of an editor yelling at you. Was that the case, or was it just that you were sort of feeling overwhelmed?
That was a different time back then. You were expected to be late. And, Rob Liefeld, Jim Lee, all those guys, when they were doing their books, they were all late. And no one really seemed to make a big deal out of it.
Yeah.
And, I think people just do what they can, and if they can get away with it, they'll get away with it. And it's a very different environment now. Now,
Yeah.
if you're late, you'll be replaced at the drop of a hat. So I think it was just the culture of the times. Like, if you weren't a problem artist, if you weren't late, you weren't doing your job.
That's so interesting, because I was talking to Simon Bisley yesterday in this, and he was saying that he almost went to Image, but he had said, I wanted them to give me, I think it was like a Viper or something, but it seems like that era, to live through it as an artist,
Yeah.
it must have been crazy to see guys buying mansions from comics. I mean,
Yeah. No, you asked if it was risky leaving Marvel for Image. The truth is, you do one book for Image, and it's like more than I'd make in 10 years at Marvel. So it just, it didn't make sense to stay. But at the same time, because there was so much money to be made, no one seemed to work as hard as they should have. They do one book and then just kind of sit back and rest or do other stuff. And I think if you talk to any Image creator during that time, you ask them what their biggest regret was, and it's, I should have done a monthly book. Yeah.
how did you wind up back at Marvel I think you were back there before Dark Tower, correct?
Yeah, I was still working on Hellshock. I was doing about one book a year. And
That was actually not that bad a delivery rate in the Image days, I have to say.
yeah, and I was writing it and drawing it, and it wasn't the art that was taking a long time. It was the story. I just had such a hard time with it, and it became such a personal story that it became it was hard to work on. And Joe Quesada was starting Marvel Knights, and they had asked if I wanted to come join them, and I said, yeah, you know what, just working for myself isn't working out. And at that time they had undergone the whole bankruptcy, they're emerging from it, and
Right.
the whole idea of Marvel Knights was to get people that weren't working for Marvel back and offering a much better deal than they were getting before, to try and bring Marvel back. And so I think I really needed the structure. I don't think I'm good on my own.
Well, it's interesting because you were sort of part of two very formative moments in comics, Image, and then to me Marvel Knights with Joe Quesada and Jimmy Palmiotti pulling people in, pulling Garth Ennis in to Punisher.
Right.
There was the Kevin Smith, I think the
Daredevil.
Kevin Smith Daredevil. So there was this sudden sort of reemergence of this darker Marvel universe. What was it like sort of working that? Because I know in comics you can be a little isolated. Did you sort of feel like, hey, we're doing something really interesting here?
Yeah, at that point comics had become stagnant, and the people working on it were told to work in a certain way, and it's not the creator's fault. It's really the company not really being open to any new ideas. And when Marvel Knights started, the thing was they said anything goes. Just if you can come up with an idea, let's do it. Now they had first approached me to do the Punisher.
Really?
Yeah, but they sent me the proposal, and I think he was like he was an angel of. Like,
Yeah,
an
there
angel
was
or
that.
something. It was-
Garth Ennis was just talking about. There was an arc right before Garth Ennis, I
Yeah.
think, where he turned into like an angel. It
Yeah,
was
he,
like
and he
a
had,
crazy.
he had spirit guns and.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I thought, wow, that's really thinking outside the box, but I don't want to be in that box.
Right.
So, I just, I said, I don't think that's for me, and they said, what character would you want to work on? And so I called up my friend who was coloring Hellshock, Jose Villarrubia, and we both went through Marvel Universe together, the handbook. I said, what can I work on? What can I work on? And he actually came up with the idea for the Inhumans.
Really?
We got to the eyes, and he said, wait, Inhumans.
Was that the old Marvel handbook where they had pinups like drawn of
Yeah,
every character and it was in
yeah.
alphabetical order? I remember that.
Yeah.
Did you do any pinups for that? Or
No,
that
was way
so
before my
so
time.
old.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was before my time. So they had the official handbook of
Right.
the Marvel Universe, and then they did the deluxe edition.
And then the handbook of the dead.
Yeah.
They also had with
yeah.
all the characters that had croaked in the Marvel
Yeah.
universe.
Oh, that'd be funny now to look at it and see who came back.
Right. I think they're all back. It's
Pretty much.
It's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
It's Bucky and.
Yeah, they're all back. Yeah, we should do that.
So you did the Inhumans and then the Sentry you did as well, which I think you won an Eisner for. Is that correct?
No, we won an Eisner for the Inhumans.
Oh, for the Inhumans.
Yeah.
Sorry. Was that sort of a weird validating moment, or was it just like?
Yeah, it was, because no one believed that we could do it. No one believed that we could do 12 issues of the Inhumans. I remember Nancy, my editor, coming in and telling me that every time she turned in an issue, Marvel would say, first of all, I wasn't going to do the next issue. I was never going to finish it, and this book will never see issue 12 because it'll be canceled before then. Because they've never successfully done an Inhumans book.
Right.
And they wanted to do something with more popular characters. But the whole point of Marvel Knights was take underused characters and do something fresh with them. So, yeah, winning the Eisner for it was validating.
That's great. And you did the Sentry after that, right?
Right.
How much? I apologize, but how far along into the Sentry's genesis did you come in? Like, were you aware of what that character was going to be? This sort of
No,
madness and.
No, I didn't know anything about the whole marketing campaign.
Right.
Paul just. Actually, I don't think I even talked to Paul about it. Joe had just called me up and said, what do you want to do next for Marvel Knights? I don't know, what do you guys have? And he said, well, Paul came to him with this idea for another book. Are you interested? And I didn't really know what it was, but I really enjoyed working with him on Inhumans, and I just said yes.
That's cool. With the Sentry, you know, and that kind of iconic costume, did you have a lot to do with the costume design?
Yeah, the costume I designed.
It's really, really striking.
Oh, thank you.
And I was, the reason I'm asking is just because my understanding is that character, the idea was to Trojan horse that character in
Right.
as an old character.
Yeah, you know what's funny is, so I designed the character, and then they told me they were going to do this thing where they were going to have John Romita Sr. Do some fake drawings and pretend like...
From the original series.
Right, that this artist that they came up with, Artie Rosen or whoever, had created him back in the old days. So Romita Sr. had done a sketch of him, and they ran it in some of their books. And then years later, Alex Ross did a lithograph for Dynamic Forces, and he did a poster of all the characters that John Romita Sr. had designed or created. And I saw the Sentry in there, thinking, wait a minute. I designed him, gave the drawings to Romita Sr., and he just drew it based off of that. But it's so funny because I think everyone at Marvel had just assumed that was real.
Right, the
they
backstory.
forgot, yeah, they forgot that
Yeah.
it was all faked. And people thought Romita Sr. designed the Sentry, and no.
It's fascinating too because a lot of the people we've had in this series have said, oh, there's not been any new IP created at Marvel, and the outliers have been Runaways and the Sentry. Those were new characters. And by new IP, I just mean there's sort of an ongoing discussion
Right.
of creator-owned work versus licensed comic work. And the Century was this whole new thing at a time when you were just, or had recently come back from Image, where the sort of the importance of creator-owned or creating new IP had been really paramount. Was it
Right.
weird for you to think, I'm going to create something totally new, or were you like, awesome, this sounds great?
Yeah, you know, when you have a project like that, you don't think about, oh, I'm creating this for a company, and or you're just enjoying the moment, and it's kind of weird. You want your character to be successful, but at the same time, you don't want to be too successful. And like, if I'd hate to be the creator of Wolverine and just
Right.
yeah, I hope Len Wein gets money for it, because it'd be horrible to think that. You know, that you created something that generates so much money and you get a piece of it. So, but you know, at the time you're not even thinking of it. You
Right.
just want to do something. You want to do a good story. You want to just have fun with it. Like right now, when if we create something for like Batman or Superman, you don't go into it thinking, oh, I want to create a character and I hope they use him in the next movie.
Right.
You just don't think like that, and we probably should. And I think that's why a lot of artists get into trouble, because you're just thinking of it as art and not really worried about the commerce side. But yeah, I don't really make that distinction between creating something for myself or for the company.
Gotcha. Dark Tower, you know, obviously Stephen King's series, the whole Wasteland and the Dark Tower series is massive. Were you familiar with the books when you came onto the series, or?
Yeah, I knew what they were. I hadn't actually read the books, but when Joe called me up and said, hey, is this something you'd be interested in? That's when I went back and started reading all of them. But yeah, that was an amazing opportunity.
And were you working? How much did you work with Stephen King, with Robin Furth? How much were those sort of duties delineated between the two of them? And were you sort of working with each of them closely, or were you just getting scripts?
Yeah, Stephen, I believe, had dictated the story to Robin, and Robin wrote them out. She was working the Marvel style too, just a very loose plot outline, and I would get it, and then I'd draw it out, and then send the artwork to Peter David, and he would script it. So we didn't work very closely. Everyone just kind of did their own thing, and trusted everyone to do a good job.
The original, the Gunslinger book, and I think the second book, had illustrations in the original novels. Did you look at any of that for sort of inspiration, or?
I did, but my book, the comic version, dealt more with them as children,
Right.
and so there wasn't a whole lot to draw on, except Wizard and Glass, book 4, which was illustrated by Dave McKeon. But then you look at the book, and I love David's stuff. He's
Yeah.
amazing, but it's very impressionistic, so you can't look at it and go, oh, that's what Cuthbert should look like, or that's what Rhea should look like. You just kind of have to do your own thing.
Well, speaking of loving Dave McKeon's art, who were your biggest influences when you were sort of starting out? Who do you feel has most informed your style?
Well, I looked at different artists in different stages of my career. Right when I was breaking in, I'd probably say Simon Bisley, Dave McKeon, and Bill Sienkiewicz. Those are my 3 big favorite artists.
Nice.
And, you know, of course I love guys like Jim Lee, and I really liked that style, except I purposely went out of my way not to draw like Jim, because our names are so similar.
Right.
I thought, when I break in, I don't want to be known as the guy that's just doing Jim Lee. So I purposely chose artists that look nothing like him. So I wanted to take my career in a different path.
Before Watchmen, the uproar about Before Watchmen sort of on the internet before a single page was seen by the public
Yeah.
was crazy. When you were approached with this project, did you have any hesitancy to signing up to Before Watchmen, or I'm wondering if that resistance was something the writers experienced a bit more?
I think that the heavy burden fell on the writers, because Watchmen has always been, when you think of the Watchmen, you think of the story that Alan created, and
Right.
If anyone's going to have to live up to it, it's going to be the writers. So, with the artists, you know what Dave Gibbons' artwork looks like, you know what J.G. Jones's artwork looks like, you know what Lee Bermejo's artwork looks like. So you're not going to say, hey, how come Lee Bermejo's not drawn like
Dave Gibbons,
Dave
right.
Gibbons or something? So we knew we would never be compared to Dave.
Right.
So it was really the artists, or the writers, that were going to be compared to Alan. And to this day, I still don't understand why there was so much negativity about it. If you don't like something, then just don't buy it. Why do you have to take sides in anything, really?
Did anyone ever give you sort of crap about it one-on-one, or were you?
No, not at all.
It feels like there was a lot of like sort of vague uproar about it, but I think a lot of that seemed targeted at DC itself and not necessarily at the creators.
Right, and the bottom line is, to me, there really is no difference between working on Watchmen or Superman. It was created by somebody else, and I'm just hired to do it. And, if like when I did The Sentry, somebody else came in and did the other miniseries, and they even killed them off, and I don't care. It's
right. Did you get a choice about which of the Watchmen you were going to tackle, or did they present to you?
They came to me with Ozymandias. I think all the books had been assigned at that point, and I just finished the contract with DC, and then they said, this is what we have in mind for you. So I was the last artist on the books. It was kind of funny because with my style, and this is why I have to give DC credit, and I'm really happy with the books that they're giving me. They put me on stuff that I would think they wouldn't consider me for. I've always been known as the dark guy going, like doing horror comics or something.
Right.
And it put me on Ozymandias. I thought, wow, that's kind of a nice leap of faith. Or even Batman, Superman.
Right.
Batman, sure, but Superman? And I think I have to give DC a lot of credit for letting me try new things.
You were sort of mentioning earlier, I think, the Edgar Rice Burroughs stuff, the comics based on his work. And in a weird way, Ozymandias sort of has that adventure quality to it. So it's kind of like a neat way for you to explore some of that.
Right.
I want to open it up to questions. So if anybody has a question, go for it.
I'm a big fan of your work. I love your style. But one thing I wanted to know is a lot of the characters you draw for variant covers in particular, and you take established characters and you draw them in a way that they seem very regal and have a lot of prowess and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
What was the reasoning behind that? Like, how did you come up with that kind of pose?
Yeah, I get a lot of flack for drawing characters like looking down at you.
I love it. I love it.
And I'm thinking, why wouldn't they?
They're gods. They're like superheroes.
Right. They'd always look down at you. And I see other artists drawing characters in the same, poses. Or I think every artist has a certain shot that they really like, or that works for every character. So I don't know why I get picked on for that, but I do have them looking down at you because we should be looking up at them, and that's as simple as it can be, I think.
Cool. Yeah.
I was just curious. I'm a big fan too.
Thank you.
All the way back to Namor. But I was kind of curious. It felt like you're. I don't know how. I'm sorry to say I don't know if you've done all your rings or other people done your rings, but that part of your art has felt like it's gone through the biggest evolution. Where in Hellshock it felt more closer to Sienkiewicz, which you already brought up, and now it's almost starting to feel like Steve Rudish, where it's just kind of very smooth and flowing.
Yeah, it's funny you mention that because I have been looking a lot of Steve Root, especially for Batman, Superman. I saw his, The World's Finest thing he did back a long time ago. But, right now everything is being digitally inked, and my wife is actually inking it. So I do really tight pencils, and she goes in and follows every line with digital inks. And it's not as simple as just darkening in the lines. I think that's what a lot of people call digital inks. They just adjust the contrast. But no, she actually fills it in and and does everything like applies ink under the pencil line. So I get that really smooth transition. And I've been looking at a lot of Frazetta and Norman Rockwell, and I kind of want to take my artwork into a more classic retro style, like combine retro with modern, and So yeah, I am looking at more traditional artwork.
Cool.
I'm trying to get away from the crazy splatter inks and things.
Yeah.
Do you see yourself doing another creator-owned title?
Maybe in the future, but I really need the discipline, and I don't think I have that right now.
Yes.
Japanese thing, like, they ran for the Superman Batman, where something similarly happens to them that will, like, affect them in the original story.
Big stuff planned for Superman, Batman.
That would be a question for the writer. Of course, it'd be nice to have long-lasting consequences that happen in the books. I think that's what you're asking, right? Well, we are. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what I'm supposed to say about the story.
Oh,
First
yeah.
of all,
How much of it has been? I mean, well, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say I actually can't really talk about the story because I don't know the story. I should be receiving the plot sometime next week, but I just did the first cover, and I can't promise any plot points or what will happen or what won't happen. But I think from the general outline I've read, it does explain and set up the characters in depth more than we've seen in the current DC continuity.
Right on. We are out of time, but I want to thank you from antiquing with John Byrne to your amazing story of spilled ink getting you your first paid work. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
everybody. A big round of applause for Jae Lee.
Thank you.
And thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was really cool.